A new docu-series called Laci Peterson has come out that shines some new light on the infamous Laci Peterson case, and we're going to be talking about it in today's video. I want to thank Midas Merge for sponsoring today's video and making it possible, and also bringing some smiles to my face with all the cute little animals that I've been playing with in the game. Okay, so what is Midas Merge? What is this game you're telling us about, you ask? So Midas Merge is a Merge 3 game, and what you're doing in it is you're combining creatures and treasures, you're completing quests, you're getting the sun's energy to dispel darkness cast by Nyx, the goddess of night. Now basically what you're doing is you're going through, in my opinion, a story. This very deep, this very rich lore. You're going to be going through the Gardens of Gold and helping the Queen Laia and King Midas in their quest to illuminate the realm. You get to build landmarks, you get to hatch new creatures, you get to merge all these cute little tokens, you get to play spin games. Y'all, it's all here. And another part that I love about this is that you can rename your favorite character and make it your own little cute name. Y'all already know I'm a sucker for cute little animals. Right. Okay, all the little animals in this game are so adorable and cuddly. I absolutely love that. Now this was created by the same designer of Sims 3 and 4. So the levels of detail to the game are amazing, and that's one thing that I love about this game is there's so many different things going on at one time, and it's not in a confusing way, but it's just in a way that's very fun and keeps you going. Like the phone makes these little vibration feelings at different times on it. It's really cool and really well thought out. Now another thing that's really cool is you combine these cute little creatures, and there's like this endless level of evolution and abilities that they can do. It's also the only Merge game with gardens that has more than one garden for you to play in, not just for events, but for like regular gameplay. It's totally free to download, and you can play offline wherever you want. Now for me, that's major because I'll be carrying the phone around when I'm working outside or doing this or doing that or whatever, or when the power goes out in the storm. And again, it's an immersive narrative journey. So all along the way in this game, you're getting this storyline from people. You're having characters come up, they're giving you hints, they're telling you to do this, they're giving you story. They're giving you sass and comedy along the way too, which is really why we're here, okay? You can also use the Vault of Riches to find different kinds of treasures, decorations, advancements, you name it. And one thing I like about that, I call it the little spinning game, is I'll get lost in that for a while and be like, oh wait, okay, yeah, cool, let's go back over to our little game that we had going over here. I love the differences. I love the change up and all that. It just keeps it fresh. It's gonna be your next favorite game, and it's awaiting you. Midas Merge from the creators of Sims 3 and 4 is free to download. Click the link or scan the QR code, and you could win a $500 Amazon voucher. Okay. Hello Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. My name's Paul, and like I said in the little intro, we are going to be revisiting an older case, yet one that has stayed in the headlines for years and years and years. And Netflix has just released a 3 one-hour series, if I said that right, called American Murder, Laci Peterson. Now, Laci Peterson is the late wife of Scott Peterson. This case revolved around Scott, Laci, unborn child, Connor. We will get into the details of it as we go. This is not meant to be like a deep dive into the case, even though it kind of is. This is on the assumption that you know about the case. This is what I'm trying to say here. So, but we'll get into the details of it and whatnot. This is mostly just a reaction to the docuseries, and what we're gonna do is we're just gonna read through. I made notes on it as I watched it, and I'm gonna use those as talking points, and that's how we'll discover little details about the case, so on and so forth. Now, for those that have followed this and like gone, I mean, just followed it from start to finish, because again, it's still ongoing, right? There's probably not going to be much new here for you. You know, just spoiler alert, I will tell you that. If you are, say, like a casual observer of the case, then yes, you're going to want to see this. And regardless, you're going to want to see it because it was put together very well. You get to see interviews. You get to see from all sides of the fence people. Amber speaks, the whole 9 yards, right? So for that part of it, I would say no matter what, you're going to want to watch it. But again, if you followed it for years, characters and know the ins and outs and this and that, then you're probably not going to see too much new here. So with that being said, what I'm going to do is, I'm not trying to be rude, but I am just reading my notes off the telephone. Okay, so that's what we'll do, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so again, this is American Murder, Laci Peterson, and the episode 1 is called What Do You Mean Missing? Now, let's see, 2004, Scott is convicted of taking the life of Laci and their unborn child, son, Connor. Now, it starts off with a phone call between Scott and who I believe is Laci's mother, and she's asking what happened that evening after 8:30, because that's the last time that she talked to him. She wants to know everything that took place. He said, Scott says everything was fine. She wasn't sick. She was excited about baking and getting ready for Christmas. Now, what they're speaking of is that infamous time, that Christmas time, when this took place. You know, Laci was pregnant. She's like, what, 8 months pregnant or something with Connor. In her world, they're planning this whole new life together with her husband, Scott. So he had other plans, allegedly, though he has been convicted. So as this unfolds, and one of the interesting things I guess you could say about this is this was a case where you watched both sides of the family, meaning Scott and Laci's, in support and whatnot, but as more evidence came out, obviously, as you know by now, Laci's family was like, oh, whoa, oh, yikes, we don't support this man anymore, okay? So you're just hearing some of those confrontations, and it's little nuggets like this throughout that, if you have not like followed every detail of this case over the years, that do make it very interesting to watch in this particular docuseries. Let's continue on. So Sharon, Laci's mom, is interviewed. I can't believe it's been so long. And then they start doing like timelines here. So she says 5:17 p.m. Xmas Eve, Scott calls her to find out if Laci's at her house, and obviously she wasn't, and he's like, well, then she's missing. Okay, so then we'll hear from 3 of Laci's friends throughout the docuseries. Lori, Stacy, and another one, I don't have her name written down here yet. I kind of write them down as they come across the screen or whatever. But these are Laci's friends, and they recount getting the same Christmas Eve phone call about her missing. Now, we hear a phone call between the father and someone like a cop or 911, says son-in-law was at golf at 9:30, went golfing. Laci took the dog for a walk in the park. She doesn't come back. The dog returns, but without a leash on. So again, the way the docuseries is playing it out is you're kind of hearing and seeing through the perspective of the different people involved in this, the realization of, oh my God, she's gone, and this is what happened, and this is the new reality that we are entering into. Now, this infamous park, it's very close to their house, right in the neighborhood. And they say lots of homeless people were there. The mom says, you know, that's where the search began, because it was like, okay, allegedly, all we know is that she went to this park and the dog returns with the leash still on, and she's never to be seen again. So the obvious spot to start looking is this park, right? Now, a detective was called in. Now, remember, this is Christmas time, and he says, you know what, they called me and were like, look, your kids are grown. This is the situation. Can you come in here? He's like, absolutely, of course. So he says he goes in, and Scott was calm, polite, and Scott starts calling him by his first name, Al, instead of like detective. And he says that was a little bit odd, but he was like, he was just this very, you know, charismatic kind of guy. Scott says his plan was to go fishing, and his wife was going to be cooking, baking, prepping for Christmas time. Scott takes him into the closet at the house, shows him Laci's purse. It's still there. Her stuff's still there. Scott gives him permission to go in the truck. The detective says Scott shows him receipts for fishing gear, and he does say Scott says he was using a big silver lure, and when they do find one, it's still in the package, which he was like, yeah, this is odd to me. He asked Scott to take him to the shop, his warehouse, the infamous warehouse, if you followed this. Scott was a fertilizer salesman, so there's like tons of fertilizer, so on and so forth, and the detective takes pictures, but of course he has no idea this time the gravity of what's in there, the boat and all this type of stuff. So he says that he takes Scott to the station, he interviews him, and basically tells him, my job is to eliminate you. So 8 a.m. Now we go through this quick little timeline here, okay? So Scott wakes up, Laci is watching TV, Laci is gonna go shopping, and she's gonna go walk the dog first. He was gonna go play golf, but it was too cold, so he decides to go fishing. Now it's very important about the TV thing, because this will come up during trial when Scott is questioned about what was in the TV and whatnot. So just remember that. 10 a.m. Scott goes to the shop / warehouse, he checks email, he gets the boat. By 11:30, he's at the Berkeley Marina, which is 90 miles away. So just keep that in mind. He drives an hour and a half away, launches the boat, drives out about a mile, does his thing. By 2:15, he's back. He gets the boat in. He calls Laci at home and on the mobile. He's wanting her to basically go run an errand that he's not going to have time to do anymore. So that's the context of the voicemail. Now by 4:30, Scott gets back to the shop. He unhooks the boat. He goes home. The gate's shut, but it's unlocked. The dog is in the backyard with the leash on. Obviously, this is a little bit weird. The neighbor had found the dog with a leash on apparently in the street and put the dog away. So What does Scott do? He goes into the washing machine, takes his clothes off and washes just his clothes. He eats a slice of pizza with a glass of milk, showers, then calls Sharon, Laci's mother, about the whole missing thing. Pause right there. To me, that's very odd. Very, very odd. Now, again, every relationship is different and whatnot, but if you are gone for the day, you've reached out on a voicemail, you come home, and it really just kind of depends, because if you take, I mean, obviously we know he was convicted at this point, right? So, but if you just play both sides of the fence, it's like, okay, he left a voicemail, maybe she's out shopping, maybe she's out doing this. I get wanting to wash your clothes, you've been fishing, they're dirty, whatever, you're gonna have a piece of pizza, you're gonna do this. I don't know. It just seems weird to me. You know, again, and I'm pretending that we don't know what the conviction is, okay? You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to like look at it that way. So for me personally, in my past relationships, I would have already called again. And this isn't even me thinking, obviously, I'm not talking about like checking up on a pregnant woman, right? If it was a pregnant woman, it would make me even more, why didn't she answer the phone? Let me just call real quick before I get in the shower. You know, let me text. You know, texting might not have been a big thing back then, obviously, but you know what I'm saying? Like, let me call one more time. You know, I just want to, I don't know if that's just me. Anyways, let's keep going. So, he goes to the neighbors trying to check on Laci. He tells the first neighbors that he's been out golfing. This will come back to bite him in the butt. Laci's parents arrive and he tells them he was fishing. They were surprised because he said he was golfing. Then they are surprised to learn that he has a boat. No one knew he had a boat. This is the first of many like, huh? Okay. Now, the detective says he interviewed Scott for an hour and he agrees to a polygraph. The detective says he's calm, he's leaned back in the chair, and this is kind of odd to him. Susan, Scott's sister, is interviewed. Christmas morning, 10 a.m., she says she tries to keep together in front of the kids. She's just talking about what it's like to receive this phone call and that it's upsetting, but also you have, you know, young kids, you're trying to keep it together in front of people. I get it. Okay, they go into a little bit of history and backstory. Scott was the baby of a family. He was a rule follower. He had lots of friends. He went to Cal Poly for college. This is where he and Laci would meet. And then Laci's friends talk about meeting Laci in college and how magnetic her personality was. Everyone literally has amazing things to say about her, including his family. Friends talk about her first meeting Scott. He worked at a restaurant. She basically, you know, sees this cute guy. She goes in. They first meet. She even wrote her number down on a napkin that he accidentally threw away. The friends did say that he tends to be very showy at first, over the top, flowers all the time, dinners. He takes Laci to Mexico a little bit too early in the relationship when one shouldn't. And then as they're talking about this, I'm thinking love bombing. And then one of the friends says, you know, we didn't have this word back then, but you know, he was love bombing her. It was like that, right? Because it's exactly what it sounded like. And so it was interesting that she says this. Now, a friend says that Scott's parents welcome Laci like their own daughter and doted on her. Even Scott's family talk about how they could tell she was the one. They talk about the proposal, the friends do, and they say that the proposal was very authentic in comparison to like his showy date kind of stuff. They get married, they're still in school, the wedding day was wonderful. Okay, now we revert back to the search in the docuseries. So John Bueller, remember that movie? The detective, he talks about dynamics that make this go viral. You know, essentially if you live through this, I mean, I remember this happening. If you live through this, I mean, this was huge, right? Especially once Amber came out with her story, his side chick. This is mega. Okay, viral before viral was the thing, right? Okay, so Ted Rollins is a reporter, Gloria Gomez is a reporter. They'll talk throughout the docuseries. The theory at the time was that basically she was walking the dog in the park and something happened. Like that was the first thing, right? That's before we get into the break-in and all that stuff. Okay, so rewind in the docuseries to when Laci was born. The mom says that she looked like her grandmother. Laci's parents split when she was 2.5. The mom meets Ron, her stepfather, the mom's new husband. She says that he loved her, that she was outgoing, not bashful. Teacher said she liked to talk a lot. She had a lot of friends. Her friends said that she had a great laugh and she was basically impossible not to like. And that basically Laci brought everyone together. She just had that energy. Okay, now it reverts back in time to the search. December 26th. Heather Adams, Laci's friend, describes getting the phone call that she's missing. And she's like, we have to go to Modesto. We have to get down there and help. There's this whole search center is created. There's a $125,000 reward offered in the beginning. I mean, it's everybody comes together. Everybody starts this whole thing with it. Okay, there is a press conference. It comes out during this press conference that Scott went fishing Christmas Eve, and the reporters are asking lots of questions about this. They will not let this whole boat thing go, and it starts to become a thing between the reporters and the police, because the police are basically like, we're not going to give all this information out, we're not going to go into detail. We see this still play out today in things that we watch. Now, one of the reporters says that their first impression was that he was reserved, and they're talking about Scott, and removed, and she thought it was odd that he wasn't engaging the media. Right? Now, another reporter says that they knocked on Scott's door, and he's basically like, no cameras, I want nothing to do with the media, which they thought was odd, simply because they're like, the media is going to help keep her face out there, so why aren't you wanting to help with that, basically? Now, the friends of Laci's all will say that Scott's basically pushing the friends to engage with the media, saying his image doesn't need to be out there, it needs to be Laci's, and that's how they'll do it. So Christmas Day rolls around, he refuses the polygraph. Basically, he said he talked to his dad, and he's not going to do that anymore, whatever. Laci's mom says that he was always busy, and she confronts him about the boat, and he says he was keeping it a surprise for her husband Ron, and he tells her he was too upset to take a polygraph, and she's kind of like, well, why are you keeping the boat a secret? It's your boat. Like, things, it's just weird, right? It doesn't make sense. Okay, rewind to 1997 now. So after marriage, this is Scott and Laci's marriage, they come back to Modesto, and the friend group hangs out again. She's happy, they were a cute couple, they had pool parties. The mom says at one point Laci calls and is upset. She wants a kid, but Scott doesn't. 6 months later, she says they're trying, but they're having trouble getting pregnant. Then she gets pregnant. She loved being pregnant. She's very excited. They read from Laci's diary about her first sonogram, and then in October, when Scott was able to first feel the baby. And she basically writes in that he wasn't too excited, but she kind of skims over this or whatever. Now, the mom says it was always in the back of her mind that Scott didn't want kids, but then all of a sudden he did. Okay, now fast forward again back to the search at this time. So the night of the 26th at Scott and Laci's house, a detective shows up. Scott and the family are there. They ask Scott for them to do a more thorough search, and he says yes. They give Scott the consent form, and he says, well, I can't sign this without a lawyer. And he says, you know, where's the trust dial? Al, why don't you trust me? And this is obviously red flag central. Now, they already had a search warrant, so that was like a test for them to do. He says, we're here trying to help you find Laci, dude. I mean, hello. Scott leaves, and for 2 days they search the house at this point. Now, a behavioral type investigator that works in the case, and she'll speak throughout, she says that she comes in, there's nothing abnormal at the home. They go to the warehouse, and attention is drawn to the boat trailer immediately. Scott says Christmas Eve, it was a last-minute decision to go fishing, but on the 20th, he bought the fishing license. He had bought the boat on December 9th. On December 8th, he had searched the bay tides. Nothing about fishing. Now, all that is very suspicious, especially when we learn the importance of some of these dates later on. Let's see. Also odd that Scott said he'd only wanted to get his boat in the water, but drove 90 miles alone to do so. Okay, so there's that. Now, a guy named Craig Grogan was a case officer. Kind of his job was like put everything together, basically. He talks about Scott making a homemade anchor at the shop. There's like a bucket with cement in it, but there's no rope to it. And then they can basically tell in the photographs of evidence where like many more buckets were made, but there's no sign of these buckets. And like I said, it's a bucket with cement in it. Now, they also find needle nose pliers in the boat with a long black hair on them. Things don't add up, they say. All right, then we hear a news report about the neighbor's house that was broken into across the street. The neighbors come home and realize the door is kicked in. They go to the police outside because remember, all this stuff is going on outside across the street. And this all starts looking like this is connected because it's so much of a coincidence, right? Okay, so December 30th, tons of tips have come in. And one of them they're talking about, the detective Al, he's like at the center or whatever, and he's walking by a computer, he sees a woman typing, and she's basically typing this thing that's like, woman claims that Scott is her boyfriend, like it has been for a few months or whatever, and they've been talking every day, and he's like, what? He's like, please hold, we already know if you follow this, it's Amber Fry. She says, and she comes out, this is towards the end of episode 1, she comes out and she's like, you know, I was called the mistress, but that's not what I was. And then it basically wraps up with some more details and goes into episode 2, which is called I Wasn't a Mistress. Let's go. So it starts off talking about Laci's amazing Christmas parties. Apparently she would put on these awesome parties. That was her thing. Well, that year Laci wasn't planning her usual party. Scott was supposed to be out of town, keep that in mind. So one of her friends basically did the party instead. And that was the last time the friend saw her. And they said that, you know, she basically was just kind of, you could tell she wasn't herself. Remember, she's pregnant. She kind of sat in the corner and just, you know, was just not herself. So, December 30th, this is when the call from Amber comes in. Detective talks to her. She's been dating Scott. They drop everything to go to Fresno and talk to her. The detectives find the other side of Scott, they say. Okay, November 2002. Amber says when she first met Scott, she just graduated from massage school. Her friend talks about a dude that she met. He's cute, all this kind of stuff. And he wants to meet the one. So she and Scott start talking. The friend is talking about Scott. They meet and it goes well. He shows interest in her life, her child. He says he's never been married, doesn't have kids, and that Amber's daughter would be enough for him, right? So she's very excited about this, obviously. So she asks him to go to a holiday party. He says yes. He shows up with 3 dozen roses. Now, the detective says that Scott kept her a secret until a guy who worked with Scott ran into one of Amber's best friends who had introduced Scott to Amber. I know, that's confusing. His name came up in conversation. Amber's friend confronts Scott and says, you have to tell her. So let's pause there for a second. This is one of the things that really came to light to me watching this, is when you start adding these timelines up and people's stories and things like this, and some of the stuff that we'll get to that one of the investigators say about Scott and how he lies and whatnot. In the face of all this, you would think someone would reel stuff in, but it's almost like he doesn't consider, like, you don't think that she's gonna find this out about Laci and missing and the media and this and that. It's so just bizarre, right? And even in this dynamic, what we're about to get into, where he's found out and it's like, you have to tell her, how he decides to go about it, you're just like, you thought you were going to get away with that? So let's keep going now. Okay, so a couple of weeks later, Amber gets a call from a friend who has an article about Laci missing. Amber, obviously in shock. She realizes everything was a lie. She calls the police department. Detective says that during the interview, Amber says on December 9th, remember this, Scott says he lost his wife. This is the same day he buys the boat. That night, Laci was at her friend's party alone. Scott was at the Christmas party with Amber. Amber is willing to wear a wire and talk to Scott on the phone. Scott told her he was spending Thanksgiving in Alaska and with family, and Christmas in Maine and New Year's in Paris. So remember all this, right? So we hear the phone call he makes to Amber pretending to be in Paris, but was actually at a candlelight vigil for Laci. I mean, this is... Just imagine the enormity of this, and also the similarities of things like Chris Watts and stuff like that. So you're gonna sit here and call your side chick while you're at a vigil for your missing wife, who at the time he had not been convicted, but you know where I'm going with that, right? I mean, come on, okay? Right? I'm just like, wow. Insanity. Okay, so let's keep going. We hear another phone call where they share the New Year's resolutions. He says he wants to be together for the rest of their lives. Okay, I'm just like, okay. So then they also wiretap Scott's phone so they can hear everything that's going on. Now, back to the burglary across the street from Scott and Laci's. So they left 9, so the neighbors leave like around 9 in the morning on the 24th, and they come back the evening of the 26th. During this time, obviously, when the home is broken into. Neighbors say they saw a suspicious van outside the home on the 24th. The neighbor changes the story. One of the neighbors changes the story about a color of the van that they saw. 2 suspects are found. Two guys, Stephen and Donald. They are local criminals. They're basically like robbing and doing this kind of stuff for drug money. Now, once this duo realizes like they're being connected with Laci's murder and whatnot, they're like, oh, whoa. You know, yeah, we totally broke in the house, 100% did that. Well, you know, yep. We did not do anything with Laci, right? We did not do that. So now when they start talking about, well, when did you do this? At first they thought they robbed the place on the 27th. Well, that's obviously not possible. So they start trying to narrow times down and whatnot, and they kind of land on the December 26th. And basically, the cops are like, it's not related to Laci's crime. You know, they have an alibi that checks out on these other dates, and so it's cool. Now, the family says at first they believe this, and they move on. But then they realize, well, why would somebody break in on the 26th? There's all this activity going on. Now, the 2 criminals would say that when they got there, they did see the media activity taking place, but they didn't really think anything of it, and they go through with the robbery. They take a polygraph, they pass it. Nothing related to Laci is ever found on them. Their alibi checks out the day Laci goes missing. One point that they they bring up is that basically because of the sensitivity of this type crime, I mean, you're being accused of killing a pregnant woman. You can imagine how that goes over in jail. So because they knew that they were going to go down for that jail thing, they're obviously not wanting to go down for this murder because they're going to, you know, they're going to get handled in prison or jail or wherever. So they're wanting to prove they didn't do it. Now, of course, if they did do the murder, they're not going to want to be, you know, they don't want that anyways, right? So there's that whole argument of it, of whichever, you know, route you go, whichever way you believe. Okay, so Scott's sister believes that the duo did it. Remember, Scott's family maintains his innocence, okay? So the detectives learned that Laci was having health issues and wasn't supposed to be walking. People said they saw a pregnant woman walking that morning, but you know, they're kind of murky. Was it Laci? Was it not? Okay. Detectives asked for the public's help to verify Scott's alibi. So like, if anybody saw this man, please come forward. You know, we want to prove, you know, we need help here. So they're putting, you know, the spotlight on Scott. They're putting him to the grind. Now, I wrote here, Scott's family shields him from the media and is insulted that people think he did this. Here's one of the things with that that's very interesting about this case psychologically, and they'll talk about this later on, is the mental gymnastics one has to do of he didn't do it, right? For the family and whatnot, for his family specifically. Because again, to admit that is to come to a really horrible conclusion about your brother, about your son, about your family member. I mean, there's no way to get around that. So Laci's mom at first says that they don't think Scott did it, but she quickly has doubts that turn to a gut feeling that something just wasn't right. And again, of course, during this time, we're kind of seeing the after part of it and whatnot. You know, if you're the family member, if you're Laci's family and whatnot, of course you don't want to think that, you know, Scott did this at first, right? I mean, that's like your family. That's your son-in-law. I mean, you know, they loved him. So, of course, you want to do the benefit of the doubt, but then again, you're going to have these nagging feelings as stuff starts to come forth. And we see this in other cases as well. Think Michael Peterson, the staircase with Kathleen's daughter, who at first stood by him, but then the evidence started coming out, and she's like, yeah, no, okay? So, it's just, I can see the difficulties that the internal struggle that one would go through and coming to the realization of this. Okay, so let's keep going. January 3rd, detective reaches out and asks him to the office. They show him a picture of him and Amber, but they had the original, but they did a photocopy so that he couldn't tell that it was the original. This is that infamous Christmas party photo. He acts totally chill. He's like, that's not me. You really think that's me? He's trying to talk about Photoshop before Photoshop was a thing, right? So, interesting that that's his reaction. You already know the cops at this point are like, yeah, they've seen this enough. This is not good, okay? A few days later, he calls Amber and he is upset. He confesses to her about lying about traveling, like to Paris and all this stuff. And he says that Laci disappeared before Christmas. Now, you can already imagine what, you know, Amber's reaction to this. Now, go back in time when he was forced to kind of confront her or whatever, he does so, but he's like, you know, I lost my wife and blah, 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 and I didn't tell you that, so on and so forth. So now here, he starts to try and gaslight her and the use of the word lost when she's like, well, what did you mean by that? And he's like, well, it was more of like a, I lost her, not like lost. And you're listening to it and you're like, oh my God. If you've been in these scenarios with people like this, you already know this kind of stuff. I mean, it will drive you crazy. And I'm listening to it and I'm like, oh my God. The fact that he's trying to actually backtrack on this and thinks he can talk his way out of that is insane to me, right? Okay, so here we go. Back to the search at the marina. So they start searching all these marinas and they're tracking Scott's truck. He comes back to the marina while they're doing this 4 different times, but he never says anything. He never asks anything. And they're like, it was almost like he's coming back to see, like, where are they searching? What are they doing type thing. Remember that they have him, they got trackers on his truck, and they have his phone tapped. They listen to Scott listening to his voicemail. He gets a call, and it's like, hey, it's Mom. I just want to let you know that the object that they found in the water, because they thought they had a hit on something, it turns out just to be an anchor. And the detective says when the voicemail's over, he hears Scott let out like a, you know, almost like a noise, a sigh, a whistle of relief. And it's just like, whoa. So they know, right? They know there's something up with this body of water. It's too coincidental. He's coming to check in. We just have to prove it. Okay, so We need a body. Detective says it's hard watching Scott's family support him in the media as they haven't told them everything. So they're watching them go forth and they don't know, the cops know more than they're letting people know. We see this in all these cases, and that what's interesting with true crime to me is leading up to it, and it's as much as we learn about these cases along the way before they go to trial, there's still things that the police and whatnot might know that they don't let the public know. And so that's why you can never really, only until you get to the trial, hear all this stuff. And even Laci's mom will say, I wanted to be at the trial every single day because I was learning stuff every day that I never knew because the cops can't even tell us everything. So it's just, it's one of those, it's just one of those things with these cases. Okay, so Scott and Amber's Christmas photo gets leaked to the National Enquirer. They plan to release it, and they basically reach out to the detectives, and they're like, look, we're going to do this. So it puts the detectives in a spot to have like a window of time to release this information. So the cops bring in Laci's parents and tell them about Amber, and this is essentially the final straw of, okay, we 100% believe that he did it, right? And again, at this point, there's so many surprises and shocks, in addition to looking at some of his behavior, that I'm sure at that point they're like, oh, we're done. We're done. So then Laci's brother calls Scott, confronts him about the article, the whole thing. And he's basically like, look, what can you say for us to believe that you didn't do this? And Scott just kind of offers generic information that it ain't working, right? Okay, so Janie Peterson, this is Scott's sister-in-law. This is the one that got the law degree to try and like help him get out or whatever. She says that when she found out he was having an affair, it hit hard. She was disappointed, but still supported him. So there's that. His sister said it was more of just a hookup, never felt like it had something to do with Laci's disappearance. Amber says when the story broke, she went to work, the press was waiting on her. I mean, if you watch this, this was huge, okay? I mean, this was, again, tabloid central, right? And she was at the center of it. January 23rd, Amber's press conference, the infamous press conference. If you haven't seen it, Google it. I would say true crime history, right? If you want to look at it from that perspective. And it's very quick, it's very brief. Basically, she's just kind of clearing her name. She says when she met him, meaning Scott, he's like, I wasn't married. She's very nervous during this. Amber says it was brief, and after that, Laci's friends thanked her. Now, the docuseries reverts back to her friends, and they were basically just like, we felt like Amber was really brave, and we know that she was thrown into a situation that she didn't really sign up for, right? She was misled too, and so they thanked her for speaking out and all the help that she did. Detectives say that Scott continues to call Amber after the press conference. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine? Whatever. Okay, so eventually she tells him it's best that they don't talk. Laci's brother and family speak out and say they no longer support Scott. So that's huge, right? For them to do a press conference and say that. I mean, come on. Amber says that she hears from Laci's mother she wants to meet to basically connect the dots about all the lies. Now, whether it's this case or if you've worked with or been around somebody like this, you already know the gaslighting, the intricate web that they weave together. For her to want to meet up with Amber is obviously natural, but then to sit there and really connect those dots and be like, okay, well, on this date and that date and blah, 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 you can only imagine how that would further illustrate to her, oh, guilty, right? So let's keep going. So another infamous interview. Scott finally sits down with Diane Sawyer. So at this point, Scott has to be thinking, I have to do image damage control, right? So the detective catches him in lies with answers that he tells Diane. Diane calls him out about saying that Laci was okay after he confessed the affair. We see this oftentimes. Again, I revert to it all the time. Michael Peterson, The Staircase. Oh no, Kathleen knew that I was doing this, hooking up with guys and stuff. Scott, oh, I told her and this and that. And Diane's like, an eight-month pregnant woman, you're telling me was pretty chill about that? Yeah, not buying it, dude. Okay. Now, she obviously didn't say it like that. That's my interpretation of it. But you get the drift. Okay, so Scott then invites reporters to his house. They ask him why he lied when she first asked if he was having an affair. And he basically says lots of nothing. Reporter says that his behavior was odd. He was not sad. He was not upset. He was very calm. When asked what he loved about Laci, he's very generic. Now back to the Diane interview, she calls him out for not mentioning his son and only only then does he try and conjure up some tears. The reporter says, going back to the other female reporter that went to his house, she's like, after the interview, she had no doubts, like 100%. She's like, he totally killed her. Totally killed her. It's just going to take time. So, day 55, second search warrant is issued. They find out that the nursery is mostly being used as storage, and he's looked into selling the house. So this is just kind of illustrating this guy doesn't have any emotion attached to this whatsoever. Okay, so towards the end of episode 2, they start getting into the dynamic of Laci's body washing up and Connor's body and the whole 9 yards. So then let's go on to episode 3. Remains are found, both Laci's and the fetus, Connor. Her torso washes up on shore. Everyone is obviously devastated, and this changes everything, right? And they just go interview the families and all this and how this news affected them, and now it's real. Now she's definitely not coming home, and just the devastation of that. This has gone on for months, and not only that, but in such a horrific manner, okay? When it's like they find his body and her torso. I mean, it's bad, right? This is your daughter, your friend, your sister, your loved one, you're this, you're that. It's devastating. It gives me goosebumps. Okay, so the detective says that during the December 24th interview, Scott said that he went to Brooks Island fishing. 4 months later, the bodies are found near there. They kind of just start adding all this stuff up, right? The detective thinks it was a soft kill. And this is talking to like the profiler type detective. And she says that that's where he strangled her. It's quiet, it's not messy. They think that he wraps her up in a tarp, drags her to the house, puts her in the truck, takes her to the warehouse, backs in there, puts her in the boat, loads up and takes her to Brooks Island with these little, anchor things, and dumps the body. Now the cops go to the judge. They get an arrest warrant. They find Scott by wiretap in San Diego because somebody else is driving his truck at this point. He's at his sister's house visiting. He was going later to meet with family to go golfing. The cops follow him, and they're listening to his phone calls. So they know that he knows he's being followed, but he thinks it's the media. And so he's kind of annoyed, and he's like telling his brother or whoever, he's like, look, I'm going to have to cancel. They're going everywhere I am or whatever. So eventually they pull him, they corner him, they arrest him. Now they're like, his hair color has been changed, like he's dyed all his hair. When they approach, he tells the detectives, please tell me that wasn't Laci's body. And they're like, seriously? Dude. Now in the car, tons of stuff. Large amounts of cash, shovels, credit cards, IDs, you name it, right? The sister says that he wasn't headed to Mexico. It was just a coincidence that he was very close to there, San Diego. This is one thing you will find with his family like this, is where they all try and explain the coincidences away. Not to say that there aren't a lot of them, and that depending on how you look at it, is how you look at it. Now we'll start to hear from some of the attorneys that attach themselves to the case, specifically a couple of attorneys for Scott. And of course they're gonna, talk about the dynamics of it's just circumstantial, it's just this, it's just that. Again, as I always say in these videos or these cases we follow, right, wrong, or indifferent, everybody would want a defense attorney, everybody would want one to go to bat for them and whatnot. So, one of the issues that I will take with defense attorneys is when they are rude to family members of the victim or things of that nature or whatever, but them fighting for their client, I get it, even if I don't agree with it, right? That I'm just like, oh God, he's so guilty or whatever. It is what it is, right? But we'll hear from his attorneys, former attorneys, whatever. And Amber, the girlfriend, the side chick, she works with Gloria Allred. If you follow true crime, then you know this woman. And, Gloria basically speaks out about all the stories that came out about Amber, and essentially how one of the pivotal things for the case for the defense would be to discredit her, because obviously she is going to be a key witness. So they do end up moving the case to another town, San Mateo, just for obvious reasons, the publicity, all this kind of stuff. Now, they will talk to a couple of jurors in this docuseries, specifically Juror 1 and Juror 4. Now, Juror 1 says that he had kind of heard about the case, it was hard not to, but he hadn't followed it. And really it wasn't until he arrived at court for jury duty or summons or whatever it was, and he's like, there was tons of people, right? And he's just like, whoa, what's going on, dudes? And he kind of figures out, oh, whoa, this is this case. Now, Juror number 4, he's a character. here. They don't interview the juror that has caused all the drama, though, I will say that. So, it's just these two guys. Okay, so juror number 4, he's basically like, look, I need to be convinced, okay? Because just because Scott had an affair, that don't mean he's guilty. And again, this is what you want to hear. You do want to hear this unbiased, like, look, show me the evidence, right? He had an affair, might be a shitty guy, but that doesn't make him a murderer. Let's see what you got. And that's the attitude that he went in with. And I mean, personally, that's what I would want to hear from a juror and jury. Laci's mom says that she found out more info during the trial than she knew before. We talked about that earlier. His defense said no direct evidence, all circumstantial, no proof of where or how the crime was done. And again, this is all very true. This is one of the things with this case where so many little things add up to this bigger picture. It doesn't paint a pretty picture, okay? But yes, when it comes down to how exactly did this happen? What exactly did this do? I mean, there's a lot of murkiness. There just is, right? Okay, so the detective says that on the stand, Scott's lawyer yells at him when he looks to the jury to answer questions. So you know how when, especially people who are testifying a lot, cops, investigators, people like that, like pretend the jury's over here, and they'll be like, you know, what's this or that? And they'll be like, well, here's the information, because they're taught to do that, right? So this would be standard protocol, in my opinion, but of course I'm not professional. So he's saying that he's doing this, and then, you know, he talks about the defense showing information deleted from a report, and it shocks the courtroom. So he basically showed this whole thing about some information that the detective took out. He has an explanation for it, and he's basically like, look, the information for me was essentially like third-party information that had been given to somebody else, and they had it in their report, so I took it out of mine. But it's this big, oh my gosh moment that does not look good. So, but he brings light to that. Now, let's continue. When they start trying to come up with a timeline for the exactly like what happened, time of death, all this type of stuff, they're trying to estimate Connor's age. It's very blurry. You know, they basically just can't nail down this time of death. And again, for stuff like this, it helps the defense. It makes it murky. It makes it questionable. We can't tell you exactly when it happened or where it happened or what happened. And again, that only benefits the defense, but clearly, spoiler alert, as you know, it didn't work in this one. Then Amber takes the stand, changes everything, as you can imagine. Amber says day one, the courtroom, you could hear a pin drop. She says she did this for Laci and Connor. And she says that Scott's lawyer would get agitated with her when she didn't answer the way he wanted her to. And the attorney said that she held her head high. So Amber's attorney was like, you know what? She did a good job. She held her head high. She went in there. They play all the phone calls between Amber and Scott. And they're basically like, look, you know, Scott did not take the stand or anything like that, but by doing these phone calls, his voice was in the courtroom. You heard him lying. You heard him in there. And it obviously didn't work well for him. Now, Amber says, she's like, I had no idea that those phone calls were going to be played for basically the general public. And so you can imagine she's embarrassed. She's, you know, she feels a certain way about it, right? And, you know, she just, you know, it is what it is. I mean, I get it. I would be too. Okay, so juror 4, the guy who was the character, he says the affair wasn't a big deal. He says what was a big deal was what Scott lied about and basically just all that. You know, he was like, look, the affair didn't make him a shitty person, but the way he lied about it and all these other things all started to add up, and these were a huge deal to him, right? And other jurors, obviously. Now, the investigator said that his lies were very short-sighted. He didn't think long-term. He thought people would lose interest. Now, this is that profiler woman that's in here. And again, this was like psychologically fascinating, because it was almost like you're looking at the lies that Scott told, and it's like, well, aren't you concerned that they're going to find that out like tomorrow? Like, what are you thinking? And if you think back again, if you've dealt with personalities like this, where they lie so much about so many different things, but then when you look at it, it's like, but it only benefits them in that moment. It's almost like they don't have a concept of people talking to each other, or 5 days going by and people being able to figure out, well, they obviously lied about this. It's very bizarre to me, the energy that they put into pulling this stuff off and the lack lack of energy that goes into actually thinking through a longer term story or lie. Okay, so the case goes to the jury. Now, the reporter says when they came back for the verdict that she sees a juror give Laci's mom a wink and she's like, oh my goodness. So the verdict's read. Obviously, we know now he's guilty. His family's stunned. Can't believe it. So they basically escort the family, his family, out. And she's like, when they get us out, we realize that where they've taken us is like, we have to walk past the entire crowds outside to get to the car, and people are yelling at them and just being nasty. The same jury will end up going, you know, to decide the penalty phase, which they come back and say, you know, he gets the death penalty. Sharon takes the stand and addresses Scott, and the reporter says that literally there's not a dry eye in this courtroom. And this part gets me right here, y'all. She asked Scott if Laci knew she was being murdered. It gives me goosebumps. Because that would be a question too, like when we go over these cases here, it's things that come up in my mind, especially when you're dealing with children, things like that. It's like, my God, did they know? Did the person leave this earth with that awareness of betrayal? You know, not only the fact of their being taken out in a brutal way, but in the, like all those thoughts that you would think would go through somebody's mind when the person that they loved and all this is the one doing this to them. I mean, and then she goes into things like, you know, Connor would be saying this, and very, very emotional time on the stand for Sharon, as one would expect. So the jury, like I said, sentences him to death. His family continues to fight for his innocence. They say they never had time to grieve Laci, as basically it was immediately like, we have to start fighting for Scott's, you know, justice and whatnot. They're still trying to do this. The profiler talks about his family's denial, about his guilt, and the ramifications of admitting that. Janie Peterson has obtained a law degree to help fight for Scott's freedom. Scott was resentenced to life without parole. Now remember, if you have been following this, that the Los Angeles Innocence Project has taken the case up to look into this dynamic of the van and things of that nature. I'm very curious to see what, if anything, that they find. Here's the thing. So that's all the notes that I put on there. There's two camps in this. There's camps that think he did not do it. There's camps that think, obviously, he did it, right? Clearly, he got this overturned. This has been a while, okay? You know, where do I sit at it, on the fence with it, or, you know, am I on the fence with it? No, I personally think he did it. Was I in the courtroom? No. Was I privy to any of this information there? No, right? This was not televised. This was none of that, right? For me, it is all of the coincidences that just add up to me thinking that he did it, right? But again, I wasn't there. I didn't see all the evidence. I didn't go over this. You know, if I felt like that there was an unfair trial, but again, this is coming from somebody who didn't watch the trial verbatim, obviously, then yes, everybody needs their fair day in court. I would probably argue that a jury would come to the same conclusion though. You know, we'll see what happens with the van. Again, my whole thing with it is this. If that was the case, if he was totally innocent, then I have a list of questions of why. Why all these things right here would have happened if he was innocent. Why did this go a completely different way? So obviously your heart breaks for Laci. One of the things that was good for me watching this docu-series was hearing from her family, hearing from her friends, hearing from Amber, hearing from Scott's family and whatnot, to get the different perspectives, to see where everybody's coming from and how they're piecing this together. But also to hear, as we often do in these cases, you know, the human side of Laci, not just the headline, not just the victim, but to hear from those who loved her, who knew her, who grew up with her, who went to school with her, who had Christmas parties with her, you know, the parts that made Laci, right? And I think that's very important for these docuseries to come up, because she sounded like a beautiful human, obviously on the outside, but especially on the inside where it matters the most, and that just made her outward beauty even more so. And I think it's absolutely devastating that it ended in this way. I will never ever be able to wrap my mind around or understand these scenarios of, and I've got goosebumps so bad over this, over the Scott Petersons, Chris Watts, these people who they want to move on, but they don't do that. In their world, they have to take out the family, they have to take out the partner. I will never get it, okay? I will never get it, because you see the devastation that is left over. Here we are years and years and years later. Okay, they're still making a docuseries. The families are still being interviewed. It's still going through court systems. The victimization doesn't end with Laci and Connor. it stretches for generations, right? Imagine her mother, her parents, and obviously everybody else, but you know, just go back to Laci's parents, right? The people who brought her into this world. Okay, having to constantly be reminded of the heinous way their daughter was ruthlessly taken away from them in this earth, right? And it's a defining thing for the rest of their lives. So my heart breaks and goes out to all of them. You know, again, I'll sum this up by saying, I suggest watching this to everybody if you can watch it if you have Netflix. Again, if you follow this case verbatim, you're not going to see too much new here. Yes, it's interesting to hear some of the things that Amber says and whatnot, but nothing's going to be that like, oh, you know, here's this. They definitely leave out some chunks of information. Definitely. I mean, it's a Netflix docuseries, okay? That, you know, there's that. So it's not as in-depth as, say, a book or all the stuff that's on the internet out at this point. However, they did a good job in presenting information, especially to somebody who's not familiar with it. And then from that, you can start digging deeper. I highly suggest, if you have not seen this, to watch the interviews with, Google them, whatever, YouTube them, Scott on Diane Sawyer, Amber, you know, her interviews that she did and whatnot. They're definitely worth watching, especially if you're interested in this from like a psychological standpoint. To watch him being interviewed, Scott, I mean, it's pretty interesting. So anyways, if you did see it, let me know what you think down in the comment section. If you're still watching, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for hanging out with me. Y'all, let's give a thank you again to Midas Merch for making today's video possible. You can check them out at the link in the description or on the QR code. Drop some little sofas off down there so that myself, Rosco, and Spirit can hang out. And until we meander down to the comment section to talk about this case and all the other ones we talk about, I'll see y'all soon. I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. Also, if you're looking for merch, be sure to check out my Teespring store. I'll put that up here. And then, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Rosco on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.